Hey everyone, and welcome back to Build UX. In this episode, we're continuing the styling stage of our project and focusing on the layout of our article content. Taking a look at where we left off last time, we got most of the type styles established for both the article and aside, just getting things drafted with some initial styling. Now's a good time to get into the specific layout of the article content, and let's take a mobile first approach with this. So we'll open up DevTools, go into responsive design mode, and things are pretty close actually to our mobile layout because we do have a single column design. But let's make sure that we have the correct margins we need across the board. So to help us out with this, we can turn on the spacing overlay for this. And we'll see that we have space double between the header and the article itself. Within the article, let's focus on getting the margin bottom for the article heading. So under app.css, our article heading, we know that for mobile at least, we want a max width of 575 pixels, and the margin bottom in this case will be our space double. Let's also take off just the margin top in this case with our normal block, since we are overriding the margin bottom. So that spacing is looking good. Let's continue right on. Our BlackBerry subheading, we can copy this media query. Actually, just to double check, it looks like we actually need to have our block selector in there. And now that should look correct. Okay. So with our BlackBerry subheading, the section heading as we called it, let's get our media query in here. We can copy the same one out and change the class name accordingly. And this will just be the space default bottom margin. Give that a quick check. That's looking good. Now our paragraphs right now seem to be having a default margin on them, and we'll want to take care of that. But what I'm seeing is that our default margin on this H2 is actually taking effect. So let's make sure we clear that out as well. So we'll say the margin top, in this case, should be 0. And the margin bottom should come into play with the 16 pixels. That's looking nice. Now with each paragraph, we have collapsing margins going on. And this is one of the strange things about CSS. If you set a margin bottom on one element and directly after you set a margin top, it'll collapse it to just combine those basically with whatever's largest. So that's what you can see is going on here. On our H2, we have the correct margin bottom. On the paragraphs, it has this default margin top, which really isn't doing anything for us. So we'll be sure to clear that out and set the margin that we want on the bottom only. Going back to our design, let's double check the spacing here. I think we just did one line break, but it looks like we'll want to do the same space default below. So in our article body, we again will clear off that margin top since it's unnecessary and is collapsing. We'll copy that same media query, paste it in, target article body, and get space default applied to each of those paragraphs. So now that's looking good. We no longer have collapsing margins, and everything has good vertical rhythm to it. Moving on, let's see what we need in terms of the spacing between images. So that should be 16 pixels, it looks like, visually. These images we can actually take care of at this stage too, just to get things tidied up. So in our initial HTML implementation of these images, we just did a 1x version of the file. So if we scroll down here, all the way down to our article body, you'll see that we just linked directly to the 1x version of our image. And this is fine, except for we'd like to have the best resolution image served depending on screen size, depending on device, pixel density, all of those variables. So one thing we can do is instead add a source set attribute in front of the source attribute. And what we can do is copy the same file path that we had before, paste it in, space, say it's 1x, and then we'll put a comma in, and we'll do the exact same file path, except for we're going to select, if we look in our assets images folder, go into final. Let me extend this out. You can see that we have a 2x version with the 2x suffix on each file name. So we're going to target that instead for the 2x version. So we have unsplash, let's say -2x. We'll put in a space and say that that's the 2x version of that image. And now what source set is going to do is, depending on all those variables I mentioned, screen size, device, pixel density on the actual physical display, all of those things, it's going to select the best version available. It'll even take into consideration things like network speed as well. And for browsers that don't understand source set, it'll just skip right over this HTML attribute and go into source. So we have a 1x version as a fallback. And for browsers that are old enough to not understand source set, they probably don't have a Retina display in the first place or a high density display. So it's okay just to fall back to a 1x version. All right, let's get the same thing established for our secondary image. So we'll say this is the 1x version, paste that in again. This is the 2x file name and the 2x source set. Give that a save. We probably won't notice a huge difference here, but if we had a high density display, you definitely would notice these things sharpen up. While we're at it, let's get some basic styles on these images. So we'll say that the class is article image, and we may have to specify once we tackle the desktop layout, which one comes first and second. In this case, they're in the correct DOM order, so we might just be able to leave them with that block name for now. But now that I think about it, we do have some negative margin going on with the secondary image, so we probably will want to target these individually. So let's say article image, and let's say first as a modifier class, and then article image second. Give that a save. Let's start establishing the basic styles that we'll want. So we'll come below article body and say article image. We know that both of them are going to have a max width and height of 160 pixels or 16 rems. So we'll set the width to be 16 rems. Since that'll be a fixed dimension across all breakpoints, I believe. We also have a border radius of 0.8 rems in this case. And so we can give that a save. Should have some basic styles going on here now. And if we look at this article image second, let's start targeting that one. And get rid of the space between these two selectors. We know that for mobile, or at least this lowest breakpoint, we want to pin the secondary image to the right side, it looks like. So that way, at the smallest breakpoint, they have a little bit of an interesting overlap. Let's see how we feel about this, but we can just start getting this established now. So on the image second, let's say the margin left is going to be auto, which should push it all the way to the right of the available space. We may have to say that these are display block. Let's give that a go and see if that fixes our problems here. Okay, yep, so that was our issue there. And then if we look at the margins between them, I believe there's a 16 pixel gap that we need to cover with a negative margin top. So we'll say margin top, we'll say calc, and what we're going to do is take our variable for space default, and we're going to multiply this by -1, and that should hopefully tuck it up further. We forgot our semicolon, so we broke the styling. That's looking good. Now notice that our first image lays on top of the second one, so we're actually going to need to bring in some z-indexing in that case. So we have our first image, and let's give it a z-index of 1. It's good to keep z-index low, so that way it's more sustainable. And let's see if we can troubleshoot why this isn't stacking on top. We may have to set an explicit z-index on the second image, but hopefully we don't have to bring in position absolute. Okay, so since that seems to not be taking effect, it looks like we may have to get creative with using position absolute here. So there is one advantage to this situation. Typically, just throwing position absolute on here wouldn't be great because we would lose our document flow, and you can see that everything's kind of jumbled now. But since we do have a fixed dimension on these images, what we can do is bring in margin on the second image that's equivalent to the height of the first image less the amount that we want to tuck underneath it. And we might be able to refine this further, but let's just give it a go. So we already have a calculation for the -16 pixels. Let's put that in parentheses here. And in front of that, what we want to do is add 16 rems to that. So we'll have 16 rems, and we can actually simplify this a little bit now since we're actually just able to subtract this. So we'll say minus the space default that we want to overlap. So if we give that a save, now we're actually getting pretty close to the desired layout here. Let's inspect this to make sure all of our dimensions are correct. And it looks like we might actually have a little too much spacing here, so let's just troubleshoot a little bit further. So right now we have 16 rems, and we're taking out the space default. It looks like it may be doubled. Let's just take that out for a second. Yep, so we had actually too much padding there, or too much margin, I should say, up top. So taking out that variable means we no longer need calc, so we can clean this up further. Give that a save, and the C-index 0 may also not be necessary at this point. Good. Okay, cool. So we got the desired layout. Let's play with this a little bit. So kind of an interesting layout. We always pin this to the right. We may not want to do that at all screen sizes, especially once we get up into these larger breakpoints. Instead, we might want to align them side by side. So we can experiment with that as we go higher up in the breakpoints here. But before we do that, let's just get the remaining styling that we need for our mobile presentation established for the article. So let's take a look at our nutrition facts. So we're going to have these always in a 2-column layout, and each of these columns is going to take up 50% of the available width. Taking a look at our index.html, we have a section for our nutrition items, and it looks like we're going to be going left to right in terms of how these items are arranged. So nutrition items. Let's start with a media query just in case. Let's say max width 575, and our nutrition items are going to take up width 100%, but each nutrition item is only going to take up a width of 50%. And what we'll also have to do is change the display type of nutrition item to be display inline block. Take a look here. All right, so with nutrition items, what we might have to do is use display flex in this case. And it looks like we actually have a typo in our class name and our HTML as well. So let's go in here and find nutrition item. So each of these have a typo in them. Let's make sure that gets cleaned up. Okay, taking a look now. So these only have a width of 50%, but we can bring in flexbox on the parent. Let's actually get rid of that width 100. It should be unnecessary. The flex direction in this case will be row, and actually we'll want it to wrap as well. So we can say flex flow as a shorthand, row wrap. Give that a save. Things are looking pretty close here. To keep things more organized by block, let's actually move nutrition item out of here and bring it into a media query. It's looking a little more cleaned up now. Looks like we need to establish the margins beneath these items so we can dig in further and take a look at what we got. Looks like 16 pixels between them. So we have a couple options here with the margins. We can set the margin simply on the first item and then have the remaining items have no margin. Or we can set 16 pixels on all of the items and then take that into account when spacing out the nutrition section as a whole. To keep things simple in this case, let's maybe target that first item as a start. So we'll say nutrition item, the first child. We'll have a margin bottom of that space default. Give that a save, see if that gives us the desired look. All right, looking good. That reminds me, we probably need, oh, looks like we have some strange margins going on above, so we may have to investigate this a little bit further. Maybe there's a typo somewhere. So let's see what happened there. Our position absolute that we put in DevTools never got applied actually in our CSS. So let's go back up to our first image and make sure that's position absolute. Give that a save. That should fix that up. And while we're at it, the article images themselves, looks like we need a space default margin below that. So the second item, since we target it specifically, we can say margin bottom is going to be space default. And then let's arrange this line so it comes in the order of TRBL, top right, bottom left. Looking good. Now our nutrition items needs a space double beneath it. And let's assume that's just for mobile for now. Space double. Give that a save. All right, that should take care of the styling of this section. Now in this one column layout on mobile, the share section as well also has the space double. Going down to our social section, you'll remember in our HTML that we reused the class names completely, but in this case, we need to provide a specific class name so we can get the margin that we're looking for just at this breakpoint. So let's say this is the article share section, and with that we can target it specifically. So article share, and we'll say that for mobile, we have a max width 575 as always. Bring this block up and give it a margin bottom. We fix our colon there of space double. Awesome, that's looking good. So everything's looking good for mobile. In the next episode, we're going to start expanding out the viewport and addressing the responsive design of the article content.